Chapter 5. William, Linus, Kenneth and Lyra arrived at the church's fence gate and entered in complete silence. They went inside the church and met a group of other light beings there. At the altar stood the priest and gave a speech. He said that everyone should try not to talk over each other and that only one should speak at a time. He said that none of them had any idea about what had happened to their world, but he assured them that it had happened according to the will of God. He said he had heard rumors of people suggesting that they had all entered the afterlife, but that was a fallacy according to the priest. He said the scripture and the place they were in did not align. He continued saying that the resurrection would have been more chaotic than what had happened to them. Everyone started talking over each other about how everything had slowed down and eventually stopped, leaving no light on the ground. They said in terror how the sun was only visible for a few minutes until it also went out. One man asked the priest sarcastically how it was not chaotic what they had experienced. The priest said that they would have experienced something totally different according to the scriptures. He referenced Revelation 21:1, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." The earth, sun and moon would have been destroyed by fire before them at the return of Christ. It would have been much more violent. Then judgment would take place, and before that there would be a trial. He referenced Matthew 7:13-14, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." He said that the way they lived their life and their faith would determine how hard it would be for them to pass the trial. He referenced Matthew 19:24, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God." He likened the trial to a bridge crossing hell on their way to heaven. The bridge would be as thin as a hair strand and as sharp as a sword. Only if they passed the trial they would get judged by God to go to heaven. Only after God had judged, they would get to see the people they loved. One woman said that she had lost her cousin who had stonified, and she loved her very much. Some concluded that since the person she loved was left behind, then this could not possibly be heaven. A man asked the priest if they would only get to meet their loved ones if they also passed the trial. The priest responded that they could only meet those who also went to heaven, but he added with caution that their reality still did not add up with what the scriptures had to say. He told them they would basically have witnessed the sun exploding before their trial. A man said that they could be in the trial right now and needed to find out a way to pass it to get to heaven. The priest held firm that the resurrection would include violent acts of God and not the passive darkening and silencing of everything that they had experienced. Then Kenneth interrupted and asked the priest how they could know if the scriptures correctly described how the events that led up to the trial would look like. As he was part of the Reversionists, he believed that their quest for reversion could be considered a trial. The priest dismissed this question and said that it was faithless to doubt the scriptures on the matter of the resurrection. But he agreed that there was definitely something extraordinary they had not been warned about. William thought about how the priest described the violent acts of God and his thoughts when he walked from the science center. He interrupted and said that he had been at the science center and that he believed that there might be an alternative world where everything had exploded instead of standing still. The priest responded by saying that scenario would sound more like the resurrection than the world they were in. The priest wondered why they had gone here and not where the explosion occurred as foretold by the scriptures. He quoted Revelation 21:1, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea." He said that after the earth, sun and moon had been destroyed, they would be remade following God's judgment. It would be a new earth and new heavens that would follow. The group asked if there was any other news from the science center. William said that in 65 days the earth would collide with the sun and everyone would be slung into space. He added that the scientists were not certain how stable our atoms were and that we might dissipate slowly. They were shocked by this prediction. Linus told them to calm down before they rushed to conclusions because they could not prove that they would dissipate. Maybe their atoms would be stable enough. He added that also maybe they won't be, but it is not something anyone should have worried about because in the current conditions, the scientists could not run the experiments that showed that their atoms were stable. Kenneth asked Linus why he was always so doubtful. He responded by saying that one day he was reading to gain knowledge when he felt the absurd agony of having to gain knowledge, and one day all that knowledge will be gone. He put down his book. It struck him as unacceptable that life would peak right when you were about to leave it. He then took it a step further. He said that he suddenly found himself finding everything unacceptable. Disorder and order, cruelty and good, etc. William heard this, and it reminded him about when he was visiting his grandfather in a coma, and he had the same sensation of rejection. He said out loud that it was an illogical position, since he would have to reject that he was ever rejecting anything in the first place. He added that rejecting everything would be a logical fallacy, but psychologically it could still be done. Linus nodded, but continued arguing for skepticism. He agreed with what William had said, since he agreed on the notion that reality should be based on logic. He then pointed out that even though rejecting everything is a fallacy, then rejecting most things could still be allowed. William asked him what else he wanted to doubt on. He responded that he wanted to doubt on his external existence is even real. The group got confused, but then the priest said that to question external existence would lead to questioning God's existence. William got an idea and reassured Linus that external existence was real by pointing to the fact that if only his mind existed, it would need some place to extend, and the place it needed to be extended would definitely be external reality. Lyra asked why it needed to be extended. William referenced one of his books that he had read and said that since the mind is built of thoughts, thoughts are extended in time, therefore they have an extension. The group cheered, thinking that William had proved external reality apart from their mind. Linus then asked if the mind could not be contained in itself, like the mind was just another thought. He said surely a candidate for ultimate reality must be self-contained. William thought about his argument, and then another idea came to his mind. He told Linus that he had read about Russell-type paradoxes where self-containment usually went wrong logically. He said that since the mind was just another thought, then he would allow for thoughts to be contained in themselves. Now he wanted Linus to think the thought of all thoughts that does not contain themselves. Linus was caught off guard. William told him to answer the question about if his thought contained itself. Linus checked it in his mind and gasped. He said out loud that if his thought contained itself, then it would be among the thoughts that did not contain themselves, therefore it does not contain itself. And on the contrary, he said, if his thought did not contain itself, then it would be among the thoughts that did not contain themselves, therefore it contained itself. It was a paradox clear as day, and it destroyed Linus' skepticism on the existence of external reality. He could not both stay true to logic and ignore their discussion. A person from the group introduced himself as Charlie and pointed out that even though the thought experiment was logically valid and its conclusions must be met, then it is still based on logic, which itself could be inherently flawed. He pointed out that even the existence of paradoxes in logic should point out that the foundation is unstable. He told them that even simple systems can initiate complex behaviors. But he added that every system of logic depended on axioms, like Russell-type paradoxes depended on set theory axioms. He simply said that their discussion was not a proof of reality. It was a proof of the limitations of our language. He said that the paradox was a symptom of how we, as humans, had defined concepts like containment and self-reference. Linus responded that anything can be doubted, even logic, but if they just believed in the premise that contradictions does not describe reality, they could find peace and know that they were not just a universe of one mind. He had already gotten used to the feeling of knowing something with certainty. William told Charlie that if they could not use logic to convince them, then they could never gather information about the world. Charlie said that the information that William would gather, he would call knowledge. And knowledge was ill-defined, since any information you might gather can be doubted by pointing out their unfounded trust in their memory. He added that no one could be 100% certain about anything. He concluded that in the end, every piece of knowledge was a belief, and likewise ideas that tried to describe reality are merely constructions built on foundations that one can have absolutely no certainty in. William remembered when he had read Descartes and mentioned the quote, "I think therefore I am." He explained it came from doubting everything until you doubt your own existence. But in the end, if there is a doubter to doubt its own existence, then the doubter must have existed to begin with. That was also a logical argument. Charlie repeated that the flaw could lie in logic itself when it was pushed to its limits. He said that even though it might seem like one is doubting, there could be an external entity doing the doubting for you. The priest interrupted and said that they must believe in that ultimately God is benevolent, so a malevolent demon would not be allowed to control all of their thoughts. He reminded them that their free will was given by God to humans after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge after the serpent had lured them to do it. He added that no being but a perfect being, namely God, could plant the idea of God into imperfect beings as them. Charlie asked William why he thought he had knowledge that logic could describe the real world. William responded that he had used logic in many other day-to-day circumstances, like trusting that the bus will arrive according to its schedule. Charlie referenced Hume in saying that making an assumption that something would behave the same forever based on some prior observations was not rationally founded. For example, the universe might randomly look logical and orderly every time he observed it, but illogical and chaotic when he looked away. Therefore, it might be pure coincidence that he found it behaving logical when he observed it. William became triggered. He said that the logical proof that external reality existed had nothing to do with observing the world and everything to do with the definitions that made up the mind. He repeated the mind needed to be contained in something because it was made of thoughts, which was extended, and the mind being self-contained lead to a paradox, so therefore it could be concluded that external reality existed. Charlie deconstructed William's argument and said that it was only William's presumption that the mind was made of thoughts. He suggested that it could be made of some things that did not extend as well. William argued that without thoughts, the mind would simply be a stale witness without any judgment or attachment, simply an entity receiving information without processing it. And further, this witness could not be considered a mind, as the mind basically was a processing unit. Charlie paused and repeated that William's logic was flawed since sound logic would not allow for paradoxes. And even if it was not flawed, all of them would still have to accept the postulate that contradictions did not describe reality without any proof, since using induction was not rational. He added that they had no proof that the universe was non-contradictory. A man in the group said to Charlie that he should cease talking since he was not contributing anything constructive to the discussion. He added that they were all here to figure out what had happened to them and their world, and outright denying logically sound arguments would not bring them closer to any kind of truth. Charlie said that he was not denying the logical truth of the argument, and he just denied ever knowing if the argument told the truth. Linus refined Charlie's stance and asked him if he was not saying that external reality did not exist, but only that they could never know if it existed, because every argument and observation was flawed in that they were constructed to suit the conclusion. Charlie agreed with that proposition. A woman in the group said that the discussion was pointless and that she was convinced of the argument for external reality. She said that without external reality, then God could not exist, and if Charlie opened the possibility for external reality to not exist, then he might as well have said that God did not exist. She wondered if Charlie even believed in God, and if not, what was he doing in church? Charlie described himself as a faithful agnostic. He believed that the existence of God was fundamentally unknowable. He said that even though he rejected certainty in anything, he still found pleasure in coming to church and hearing the gospel being spoken. The priest said that to have faith one must have certainty. Charlie disagreed and argued that faith might require psychological certainty, however nothing was promised even if they did feel certain. He added that faith was not something that was passive, but required active participation. Trust in the will of God did not come by sitting around and waiting for the blessings to come, but instead by interacting with the world. The priest remembered a reading from Proverbs 21:31. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. He said that Charlie was correct in that blessings did not come on their own, but that ultimately God decided when and what blessings would arrive. The church group still felt that Charlie was crossing the line with his skepticism. A man told him that if he really had faith in God, he would acknowledge external reality as existing. The logical argument was not even needed if just his faith was strong enough. His faith should have been enough proof of the fact that external reality existed. The church group started to ridicule Charlie and called him a false believer. Charlie felt that his presence was no longer wanted in the church, and he regretted to opening up to them about his beliefs. He felt he had been respectful towards the group in the discussions, however the respect was not reciprocated. He walked out the church without saying a word, while the church group cursed him from behind. The Reversionists felt sorry for him, and even though they had different perspectives, they still thought that his arguments were valid and that he did poke holes in their theories. However, they thought that his skepticism was too strong for them to make any real progress on their journey. They had to let him go. William gathered his group and had a personal conversation with them. He told them whether they were in the right to let Charlie go, since his arguments were sound. Kenneth said that his viewpoints were too extreme and they would have gotten nowhere with him. They agreed, and Linus concluded that even though Charlie pointed out that they had some axioms which they just had to assume were true, it was better than being stuck in their journey. Lyra said that they were not so different from the religious people in the church, since they needed faith in their axioms to progress. William agreed, but still wanted them to meditate on their core axiom that contradictions did not describe reality. They did, and William asked what they felt. Linus said that it felt like the universe was orderly, even though Charlie had pointed out that it could just be a coincidence while observing it. He pointed out that one could not believe in one thing and at the same time believe in its contradiction. Non-contradiction was essential to reasoning anything, even though Charlie had said logic itself might be flawed in describing the world. In essence, logic itself assumed non-contradiction. Kenneth protested and said that if the thought the mind had could both be contained in itself and not be contained in itself, then the attributes that described it would collapse into instability. It would be both true and false, and neither true or false that it had that attribute. The thought's identity would be non-determinable, and if it could be one thing and its contradiction at the same time, it would be nonsense. William came up with a thought experiment. He told them that they should consider the proposition that the thought contained itself, or it was a car. Then if the thought did contain itself, then the proposition was true. Now that they knew that the proposition was true, then William told them to consider the contrary case, that the thought containing itself was false. This could be done since the thought containing itself and not containing itself was both true at the same time due to the contradictory nature. The original proposition was still true from the previous assertion, but the part that said that the thought contained itself was not true any longer, since it was evaluated as false. Then the thought was necessarily a car for the proposition to remain true. He added that the car could be anything arbitrarily, so identity really had vanished in a world of contradiction. The other reversionists were shocked by this thought experiment. Kenneth said that this proved that contradictions could not describe reality, since everything would amount to the same identity. Linus was surprised too, but he pointed out that William used logic to reach that point which Charlie detested. William acknowledged Linus' criticism and told him that it was the best he could do in rejecting contradictions. He reiterated Linus's own point in that logic was the best tool for their reasoning. He proclaimed that they were axiomatic pragmatics. The Reversionists turned to the priest, and William asked him if the scriptures said anything more about the trial before the final judgment. The priest quoted the scriptures Revelation 20:12, "And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done." He likened the trial to that of a court trial where one's deeds were examined and a verdict was passed. William asked if one's good deeds could make it easier to pass the trial. The priest concurred and said that judgment was based on a mix of faith and deeds. He added that God was most merciful and his grace would save all the pure of heart. He said that their faith was essential, but deeds were proof of their faith. Kenneth said that all of them should be alert, as they possibly were in the trial right now. He said that the way they had acted in their previous life shaped them and their capabilities of returning to the new earth. He said that each of them individually had to reach the goal of returning. The priest protested and repeated that their reality looked nothing like the scriptures had foretold. William reiterated that the priest had agreed that the idea of an alternative reality, where the stonified people might have survived, sounded much like the prophecies, and therefore Kenneth might have been right about what they were going through. The priest shrugged and said that it was only speculation. The priest told the group to pray and ask for forgiveness of God. He assured them that everything had happened according to God's will. As the prayer started, the Reversionists walked out of the church. They discussed how they might pass the trial. Kenneth had the idea of going to the town square, as souls might have been gathered there in large numbers, and perhaps they were looking for answers as much as the Reversionists did. The group agreed, and William looked at the night sky in order to orient himself towards Polaris. The town square was located to the south, so they had to walk in the opposite direction of the North Star. They started walking with William and Linus, stretching their arms out into the void, and Kenneth and Lyra walking behind them. Kenneth told Lyra privately that soon she was going to see the sun rise again, as they all would return to the new Earth. Lyra was unsure about that, as they were all lacking a method for returning. She said they had not gotten any closer to a real cure for their world. Kenneth told her that their trial was like going to an exam. They spent their previous life preparing, and that was the school. Now they just had to pass the exam. And just like the exam had a deadline, then the trial they were going through had a deadline, as soon the Earth would be ripped apart by the tidal forces from the sun. Then they would be slung out into space and be all alone. Kenneth considered it impossible to pass the trial without help from a community. Lyra liked Kenneth's metaphor for what they were going through, and it stopped her doubt over if they were going to pass the trial. She told him that she usually did really well at exams, though she was very nervous right before the exam started. But once the exam started, she was really focused. She was kind of glad that the trial had started so suddenly without her knowing about it beforehand. Kenneth laughed and agreed that a surprise could often be welcomed. William talked with Linus about what had happened at the church when they had met the skeptic Charlie. He wondered what would happen to him now that he was excluded by the church. Linus said that he probably would not be accepted by the chosen ones, since they felt certain of one thing, that they were in heaven. Charlie's extreme skepticism would overwhelm the chosen ones, since he would believe anything they said. William countered Linus' argument, saying that Charlie might just want to find a place to feel welcome, and even though he did not accept the beliefs of the chosen ones, he might just hide there just as he had blended in at the church. William added that maybe Charlie just wanted peace and to stop searching for something like their own group continuously did, as their goal was reversion. The goal of the chosen ones seemed to be in alignment with these values. Therefore, it was possible that he would join the chosen ones, William said. William told Linus that Charlie would not join Boris' group because, like their group, they also searched for reversion, but in a twisted way. Linus disagreed and said Charlie might have become cynical by being excommunicated from the church. He might wanted to seek revenge towards the world. He expressed that Boris' group was practicing psychological torture against others in order to reverse themselves, and maybe Charlie would subscribe to that ideology of pure spite. Not that he wanted to return to the new Earth, since he would not be convinced that there was a new Earth to return to. He would be evil simply as a product of his cynicism. William looked worried and asked Linus if it was wrong of them to let Charlie go and if they should have given him a chance. Linus reiterated that his skepticism would have gotten them nowhere in terms of finding out how to pass their trial. William turned to Kenneth behind him and asked him if he thought the trial would be different for everyone individually. He asked if everyone had to achieve the same to pass the trial. Kenneth said that according to the priest, they would be judged on the same factors, faith and deeds. Furthermore, the trial they would have to go through would be as easy for them as the amount of faith they had and deeds they did. He said it would not be fair if what they had to achieve was different. However, it was fair that the process of achieving it was more difficult if they did not have faith. Lyra asked if just as how they had discovered their understanding of love as a common denominator, maybe faith was a common denominator as well. Linus asked how that could explain Charlie being there, as it seemed he had no faith in axiomatic principles. Kenneth said that Charlie had found a loophole in that he defended his point to not be certain about anything, though he still had faith in some things. He knew how to distinguish faith and true certainty. The Reversionists agreed that faith could be a common denominator for the survivors of their world. Therefore, they concluded that everyone in their world had an easier time passing the trial than the ones who had little faith. William concluded that the ones who had little faith were the stonified people, and they might have survived in the alternative reality where the earth and heavens exploded. They might have been slung out into space and were destined to pass the trial alone. The ones with faith, at least, had time to converse with their community to figure out what they needed to do before they met the same fate of isolation when the earth would be ripped apart by tidal forces as it approached the sun sufficiently. They concluded that this was an event that had happened to everyone on Earth and maybe in the universe, and that all people were going through a trial at that moment. The stonified people in their reality experiencing isolation, and the light beings in their reality having a few days of consulting before also facing isolation. It became important for the Reversionists to share their findings with the townsfolk and make everyone work in unity to save themselves. Now they sped up to reach the town square in hopes that they could reach it before all hell went loose in their world between different factions.